Now, I want to talk to you about seizing the moral high ground. Our movement, I think, it's imperative that we do that. There's a number of reasons, which I'll go through today in my speech. But I think if we're going to be successful, if we're going to grow the movement, and we're going to effectuate change, we need to seize the moral high ground. Because right now, the enemy has it, and they've had it for a very long time. And the only way we're going to take the moral high ground back is by outthinking them and using the terminologies that favor our perception of things over theirs. And they're very good at what they do. So you don't want to alienate people who are middle of the road or who are undecided or just have, you know, a standard bourgeoisie, middle class kind of perspective on things, because if you do that, it's going to be very difficult to get past that and to communicate with them. But I want to start off by talking about who currently possesses the moral high ground. And I'm sure that we all know to some extent who that is, but I'm going to be very specific about that. I'm going to give you a list of who possesses the moral high ground in my opinion. And by the way, let me just say, I just flew in from America the other day. This is my first time in Ireland. So I don't mean to speak to you as an authority, because I'm not an official authority of any kind. I can give you my opinion, and so that's what I'd like to do, is just give you my opinion. So the moral high ground, the cultural Marxists occupy the moral high ground. And when I say cultural Marxists, I'm just using it as a term of art. Who are the cultural Marxists? Well, international plutocrats, the bought politicians who do their bidding, the militant non-whites, Zionists, and social justice warrior Christians. Now, when I say social justice warrior Christians, I know many people here are probably Christians, and I certainly don't mean to denigrate you whatsoever. But you know, the Pope just flew into my country just 2 weeks ago and jumped up and down and celebrated open borders and encouraged more people to come on in. He encouraged them to break the law, to come across the borders and keep coming en masse with no restrictions, and said it was a good thing and applauded it and spoke to them in their own language, which he has his right to his opinion also, but we have a right to our opinion. So we need to choose our words carefully. If we're going to win the battle for the survival of our people, we need to adopt means and to express ourselves in very carefully chosen words. Those 5 groups that I just mentioned to you, it's like a tag team. Do you ever see a tag team in America, the wrestling matches? No. Okay, one guy starts to get tired, he steps over, he slaps the other guy on the wrist, the other guy comes in, okay? So the Pope slaps the plutocrats on the wrist, and the plutocrats slap the Zionists on the wrist, and the Zionists slap the politicians on the wrist, and they just take turns. There's a tag team. And they're very good at what they do. What did the plutocrats want? What's their objective? What's their desire? Well, cheap labor. They want cheap labor at any cost whatsoever. They don't care where it comes from. So one of the previous speakers mentioned Peter Sutherland. Let me give you just a little bit of background about this guy. Okay, he's got a curriculum vitae that Satan would envy. He was a chairman of British Petroleum. Okay, he was non-executive executive chairman of Goldman Sachs. He served on the steering committee of the Bilderberg Group. He is currently an honorary chairman of the Trilateral Commission. He was the actual chairman of the European region of the Trilateral Commission. He was vice chairman of the European Roundtable of Industrialists, and you'll love this, he was a financial advisor to the Vatican. Okay, so he's got all the bases covered. He's very good at what he does. The previous speaker also mentioned about the BBC article where Peter Sutherland was talking about undermining European homogeneity. So if you're out there listening, when you get a chance, I'd like you to go to Google. Type in Peter Sutherland, homogeneity, Homogeneity. This is the spelling bee in part 2. Homogeneity, okay? Type that in, it'll come right up. And go read the article for yourself. The European Union should be doing its best to undermine any sense of Europeans' homogeneity and difference from others. And yes, that's genocide. There's no 2 ways about it. As the previous speaker mentioned, genocide isn't just some horrific, horrible act of violence against a particular group of people. It's that too, but it's other things. It's just death by attrition, by 1,000 cuts, by policies adopted over years and decades, by people who have a sinister agenda of wiping out our genotype, our people. And we have the right to resist that. That's not evil, it's not hate, and it's not wrong. It's the ultimate virtue, in my opinion, to resist your own dispossession and demise and genocide. The plutocrats want cheap labor. Now, these refugees, these people who are flooding in, threatening our very existence, Viktor Orban of Hungary pointed that out not too long ago. These people are working tag team with the bulk politicians. Now, the bulk politicians, again, they open the borders, they ignore whatever the written law is to do the bidding of the plutocrats. And why? Well, partly because it's cheaper for the plutocrats to open the borders and bring in cheap labor than it is to pay European people a decent wage to raise a family and have kids. That's one of the reasons. The communists currently lording it over the Greek people. Tsipras, is that how you say his name? I can't pronounce it. But at any rate, him and his people, they eat well, they're well clothed, they're well housed, but it's the Greek people who go hungry, who starve. It's the Greek people who suffer. It's the children who go without. It's not the traders at the top who impose their will downwards on the regular working class people.
It's the same in this country.
It's the same in the Western world. It's the same anywhere you find white people who want us to survive as white people, as European descended people. Anywhere you find that, you'll find this dynamic going on. This is not an accident. This is not just some crazy coincidence. This is genocide. Planned, deliberate, purposeful, and preordained. The relationship between the plutocrats and the bulk politicians is an example of political symbiosis, mutualism. They both benefit. The plutocrats get their cheap labor, they get their profit, they get what they want, the politicians get cheap votes, and they get well-greased palms. They're very well taken care of. It was just recently in the news not too long ago. In Germany, Merkel, one of the first things she did when she opened the borders and allowed people to just flood in was to get them registered for employment. It's right in the news. You can look it up for yourself. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. People come to your country, you'd like for them to work, to integrate, and to fit in. But we're talking about undermining wages, quality of life. We're talking about ultimately dissolving Germany, dissolving all the European nations one at a time. It's as if we're being singled out piece by piece, one by one, for removal, for our own dispossession. Mama Merkel, recent cover of Der Spiegel, had Merkel dressed up as Saint Teresa. There's that meme again, okay? Check it out if you haven't seen it. And
she won the Kalergi Prize recently.
Did?
What? Yeah, the Kudenhof Kalergi Prize. If anyone wants to look up who that was, Mr. Kalergi.
And they're about to give her the Nobel Peace Prize as well soon.
Well, the Nobel Prize means that you're the best and most efficient sellout.
Yeah.
But they pose the plutocrats. They pose as moral paragons. They use humanitarianism as a guise, as a mask, to hide what they're really after. And what they're really after, again, is cheap labor, and they want to paralyze the society and turn it into a multicultural hellhole divided against itself, so that resistance to their policies becomes impossible by ordinary people who would simply want to stand up and protect themselves and protect the future of their children and protect the sacrifices made by their ancestors. Merkel doesn't care. Putin, when he sent his troops into Syria, I think recognized, and this is my opinion, that by stopping the American funding of terrorists and the destruction of Syria, Putin, I think, is trying to stop the circumstances which is generating the flood of refugees from the Middle East into Europe. And why doesn't the United States do that? Why doesn't Merkel do that? Why doesn't the European Union do that? Why don't these other people come together and say, why don't we address the issues that are at the problem, at the heart of the problem? Why not do that instead of spending money and resources on the refugees once they get here? Why not be proactive and stop it? It's because, and this is my next point, they want the flood of people to come in. They want the refugees to come into the country. They want the disruption and the dislocation and the human tragedy. Because their ultimate aim, their ultimate agenda is a one-world plutocratic police state. This is what they're after, and this is what they're trying to achieve. Their sick, pathological, ravenous lust for profit. They want to eliminate borders. They want to destroy real human diversity. Real human diversity. What does that mean? That all the peoples of mankind have a right to a homeland, to a living space, to an area in which they can follow their own traditions and customs and the things that they feel are important for their people. That's the human right. And it's these sinister people that are in power that are taking that away from not from the European descended peoples, yes, but from everybody. Everybody suffers. Because the people that are in Syria or any of these other countries, they're being bombed, they're being killed every single day. So this is not something where we're unique in that sense. We're certainly unique, but the whole world is suffering by this top-down, plutocratic, one-world globalist agenda that is eliminating the beauty of the different expressions of mankind.
Exactly.
And this has to be done away with. Now, let me tell you, Merkel and the rest of the criminal overlords that are occupying Europe, they don't care about the black man, the yellow man, the red man, the brown man, or the white man. They only care about the green man. The green man is the plutocrat. That's all they care about, and that's what they're after. You think you have a choice because they're in power, but they're just buffers. They're buffers that are put in place so that you think you have a choice, you have a say, but you don't. This is Stalinism light. This is tyranny. That's what this is, plain and simple. But it's clever. It's cleverly done so that you can't recognize it.
That's what it is.
And it has to stop. The next time we have a meeting, I would really like to have a drummer in the corner doing rim shots. A rim shot is, for a comedy act. And I don't mean to turn this into a comedy act, but let me just give you a few examples of what I'm talking about, okay? They use the word diversity. What do they really mean? Balkanization.
Yes.
Multiculturalism. Divide and conquer.
Yes.
Immigration. Genocide of the target people, whether it's European or otherwise. Globalization. Planetary police state. Democracy, plutocratic tyranny, human rights, dehumanization. Justice is anything the plutocrats want. Let's face it. If they want it, that's what they get, and then they call it justice. They buy the Supreme Court in my country. There's 9 people that basically sit around in black robes and pretend that they're dispensing justice. And we all look at them like they're gods on Mount Olympus. They're just whores of the plutocracy. That's all they are. And they're there to do the bidding of the plutocrats. The economy, well, if things keep up the way they're going, the economy is just going to be a bunch of postmodern serfs toiling on their plantation. Independence. What is it, independence? How can they even use a word like independence without vomiting? Because when they say independence, what they really mean is the wholesale bondage and enslavement of all the peoples of mankind through their money power. And phonic tolerance. What's tolerance? Should I be tolerant when I watch my people being raped and dispossessed and exploited and their future robbed from them and all the blood that our ancestors have spilled so that we can be here today? Should I be tolerant of that? What is tolerance? When did tolerance become the premier virtue of the world, of society? Because all tolerance is, when they use the word, is celebrating the demise of your own culture, your own people, your own nation. Speaking of these subjects, now, I'd like to mention another one of the groups on the list, the militant non-whites. Now, I want to say something at the outset that I feel strongly about, and I think this is important that I impart this clearly. Because remember, my topic here is the seizing the moral high ground, which is, again, something we need to do. So, most non-white people, in my opinion, are like other people in the sense that they want to go to work, they want to raise their families, they want to have a house, they want to be able to live in peace, and they're innocent bystanders to most of this. I don't blame them. I blame the damn plutocrats and the Zionists and the social justice warrior Christians and the whole sinister bunch that work as a tag team, hand in glove, that manipulate these people to do their bidding for them as their tools. So it's important that I feel it's important that when we have these meetings and we have these discussions, that we make that very clear demarcation, that we're talking about people who are innocent, who really haven't done anything wrong. Now, I know that doesn't apply to all of them, but I think it's true of most. So, if you want to seize a moral high ground, be careful of that. Now, so if you hate or persecute or harm anyone simply because of what they are, poof, there goes your moral high ground. You're not going to have it anymore. I do also feel that it's wrong to harm any sentient creature unless it's self-defense or defense of others. So I feel strongly about rights of animals. And I think that's another segue into promoting our belief system. If we can do away with the brutality of factory farms and the horrible abuse that these animals suffer, I think that would be expression of our humanity and expression of our sympathy with our fellow creatures. Now, other than that, there's not much to say about the militant non-white. I'm talking now about the militant non-whites, not the innocent ones. The militant ones simply do what they do because they're backed and supported and promoted and funded by the plutocrats, and they're covered by the politicians. How many times have you seen, and the media, how many times have you seen horrific crimes, and you almost have to be an investigator to find out who committed it? Because they cover up, the perpetrator is like, well, who did it? We see the victim, we see the blood, we see the gun, we see the knife, we see the whatever it is, we see all the traces, but we don't know who did it. And that's often the case. But on those occasions where the perpetrator is a European person,
Yeah.
particularly a white male, then he's the poster child of evil.
Yeah.
So there's a manipulation going on there. There's a manipulation in the media. So speaking of manipulation of the media, let me move on to the next group, the Zionists. I like to note the following fact. No group of people that has for decades supported a cruel occupation, that has for decades made excuses justifying an ongoing campaign of genocide, the Zionists, no such group of people have the moral standing to lecture anyone about anything. And quite to the contrary, it's our position to start to lecture them for a change. We take control of the narrative, and we tell them how it's going to be. They don't tell us anything. Now, the social justice warrior Christians, I'm going through that list one by one if you haven't noticed that already. The social justice warrior Christians. Again, I use that term as a euphemism for much of Western Christianity. I understand that there's a schism. You have the Eastern Christianity, which I don't know much about. Apparently that's much more tradition and identity orientated. So that's a wonderful thing. But for Western Christianity, I mean, what more can you say than look at the current Pope? That's where we stand. So again, he was in my country preaching open borders. And, you know, Pope Francis also advocates the ongoing refugee invasion of Europe. He invited them into basically to come on into Europe, and his tank team partners, the plutocrats and the business people, and they just went right along with it.
Well, simultaneously only giving 4 places in the Vatican.
Yes, 4 places in the Vatican. That was a very, very heartwarming gesture on the Pope's part, by the way. But you know, here it is. It's very difficult to stand up against a moral authority like the Pope. Let's face it. It's very difficult for any one of us to take on the immense weight that's put on us by the memes that have been generated for decades now about racism. But the whole list I just gave you, that I just went through. So what we need to do is we need to look back at some of our own culture bearers and torch holders, people who have spoken for us over the decades. And I'd like to give you a very good example. I'd like to recite to you the words of Alexander Solzhenitsyn. And this is a Nobel Prize that does matter. The 1970 Nobel Prize in Literature. Let me read this to you. And this is Alexander Solzhenitsyn said this. This is a direct quote. It has been fashionable to talk of the leveling of nations, of the disappearance of different races in the melting pot of contemporary civilization. I do not agree with this opinion, but its discussion remains another question. Here it is merely fitting to say that the disappearance of nations would have impoverished us no less than if all men had become alike, with one personality and one face. Nations are the wealth of mankind, its collective personalities. The very least of them wears its own special colors and bears within itself a special facet of divine intention. And that's Alexander Solzhenitsyn. So, the Pope can think what he wants. He has a right to do that. The politicians, the militant non-whites, the Zionists, and the rest of the Christian social justice warriors can think what they want. But let me tell you, the Pope's logic leads to the destruction of all the peoples of mankind. The annihilation of human diversity is exactly what the Pope's logic leads to. And I don't care if he is the Pope. He's wrong.
Okay.
Pope Francis calls for the death of human diversity, and he does it with a smile on his face and with a gleam in his eye. And he gets away with it, and nobody questions him on it. And why? because the social justice warriors possess the moral high ground. Netanyahu, the former furniture salesman who dabbles in genocide, he's perpetuating an ongoing brutal occupation against the Palestinians. And he has announced that Israel will accept no refugees. And he gets away with it. Why? Because the Zionists possess the moral high ground. The plutocrats, they're destroying this planet with their greed and their avarice. They mask their lust for cheap labor and ecological devastation in the rhetoric of humanitarianism. They export whole industries to other nations, leave families unemployed with no income. And in the nations that they move their industries to, these nations typically have no environmental protection laws. So they destroy the environment, they render people unemployed, and then they hire the people in the third world where they set their factories up to be wage slaves, child slaves, and they get away with it. Why? Because the plutocrats possess the moral high ground. The militant non-whites. They openly, and it's been talked about by previous speaker in this meeting today, they openly, brazenly, wantonly advocate policies that can only result in the genocide of European descended people. And they're flagrant about it. They don't even try to hide it. They're proud of it. Okay? They advocate for the death of our people, and then they have the unmitigated audacity to pose as moral paragons of morality. And they get away with it. And the reason is because they possess the moral high ground. The bold politicians like Mama Merkel, or as Der Spiegel referred to her, Mutter Merkel. Apparently that means Mother Merkel in German. And her fellow plutocratic whoremasters sell out the blood of our ancestors and the future of our children, our destiny in the stars, for good press, cheap votes, and a few pieces of silver, and they get away with it. And why? Because they possess the moral high ground. Well, you know, I don't care if it's the Pope, the Premier, the President, or the Prime Minister. Nobody has the right to tell us that we don't have a future, that our people can't go on. That right was given to us. That right, our right to survival was given to us by the Creator, and only the Creator can take it away. It's our right. True, we have to fight like hell for it. That's true, but it's ours. We just have to have the courage to fight for it and the wisdom to know how to fight for it. So I want to address another question that's also very important. How did the social justice warriors, social justice Christians, the Zionists, the plutocrats, and the militant non-whites, the bold politicians, how did they come to possess the moral high ground?